New York, Chapter 13. My mother knew I was pregnant and in trouble. Looking back, she knew. All she did was sit by the door of the store all day and fix up the vegetables and watch out for her two daughters. Dee Dee and I were two young girls, and there were men everywhere. And she knew. She never said a word about either. Mama wasn't a pushy woman. She was as quiet and watchful. She had that polio, and she used to drape a towel over her twisted left hand sometimes to hide it when she walked around. She was nearly blind in one eye, and had occasionally fainting spells, but she wasn't weak-minded. She saw I was unhappy down there and started sending me up to New York practically every summer by Greyhound to stay with her family. The fare was only $19 one way. Mame had 5 sisters and 1 brother in New York, plus her mother, and they were all living high. My Aunt Laura and her husband Paul Sniffman, they owned apartment buildings in the Bronx and Harlem. My Uncle Hall owned a kosher delicatessen in Brooklyn. Aunt Bernadette married a furrier, and Aunt Mary opened up a leather factory. Now they were a funny family. They kept their feelings secret, bottled up inside them till they swelled and burst out like a water balloon you squeeze. I had 2 aunts, Bernadette and Rhonda, who hadn't spoken to each other in 15 years. I don't know why. It was a big secret, and you weren't supposed to ask, so I never did. My aunts never wanted to be bothered with me too much. I was the daughter of their poor, crippled sister. I was the poor cousin from the South. They called us Mama's family, greenhorns, in Yiddish, because we were the last to get to America and we weren't Americanized. But still, I liked to visit them because New York was an eye-popper for me. Plus, everyone seemed too busy to care about what race or religion you were. I loved it. I had never seen so many people rushing about. I would say to myself, where the heck they gotta be rushing like that? But I wanted to rush like them, and got with the program as soon as I could. Sometimes I would just go out and walk with them so I could rush with the crowd. I had nowhere to go, just going crazy, rushing with the rest. I would stay with my grandmother and Aunt Mary and Aunt Laura when I visited. Aunt Laura was the oldest and richest mother sisters. Aunt Laura was the oldest and richest of my mother's sisters, a meticulous woman and a fabulous dresser who wore white gloves and beautiful colored dresses. She lived in a huge apartment on West End Avenue in Manhattan, with shiny hardwood floors, beautiful mahogany furniture, and a living German maid who cooked and kept house. Though no one could clean Aunt Laura's house better than Aunt Laura herself. She had no aversion to housework. She'll get on her hands and knees and scrub her kitchen floor until it shone. The meals will be served in courses by the maid while you sat there, and you had to ask to be excused from the table. Her family spent summers at Rockaway Beach or Edinburgh, where they had a small cottage about 8 blocks from the water. Anybody was supposed to have a cottage by the beach. Aunt Mary lived on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx and ran a factory that made leather trimmings for fur coats, jackets, muffs, hats, and wearables. Her cool shaving or trimming company. I worked in her factory running a machine that cut belts. Plus I did other odds and ends for my Aunt Mary. Whatever she ordered me to do, she was as mean to me as the day was long. Rachel, do this, and hurry up. Rachel, and do that. But she was an accomplished woman. In the 1930s, it was unusual to see a woman running a business. She created it from her own ideas and with the help of her friends who were expert furriers. Aunt Mary had 2 daughters, Louis and Enid, who were about my age, but they didn't have to work in her shop like I did. They stayed home in the black maid, who made sure they got plenty of chocolate pudding and Yankee Doodles. I'll never forget that. Yankee Doodles were chocolate-covered cakes with cream inside. I loved them, but I couldn't have any. On Sundays, the maid will dress Louis and Enid in cute white cotton dresses, and those will stand in the mirror and wag to each other like two mannequins. One will say to another, "Well, dear, you look so nice." "Thank you, dear." "Are you ready to go, dear?" "Why, of course I am, sister." And off they go to the movie theater around the corner, the maid fusing over them as they went. I'd be standing there, and they wouldn't even think of asking me to come. If I wanted to tag along, I'd have to pay for my own way. I stayed home. See, my mother's family, they didn't say a lot to you. They would always take care of you in a basic way, but they never said a lot to you. I didn't feel loved by them. The only one that really loved me was my grandmother, Bobby. Bobby loved me. She had moved from Manhattan to an apartment at 1020 President Street in Brooklyn after Saeed died. It was near Prospect Park, in a building that I believe was owned by my Uncle Dave. Bobby was a warm, funny woman who spoke no English and was full of life. She was as heavy and short, and after she'd been here a while, she did away with what wig she wore in Europe and wore her long, shiny white hair combed, twisted into a round bun on the top of her head. She was clean as a whistle. Clean. She ironed herself to death. Everything she wore was clean and ironed. Her cotton house dresses were freshly washed and ironed. Even her tablecloths, which she changed 3 times a day. When you eat kosher, you have to change your tablecloths for every meal. Ironed and always immaculate. I couldn't iron, you know. I didn't know how to iron a shirt till I got married. I could balance the books at the store and drive a trailer full of supplies, saw wood, and pump kerosene and chop ice with an ice pick. But I couldn't iron, or keep a house, or cook a pot of grapes to save my life, and still can't. Boy, your father was in for a shock after he married me. Bobby had diabetes and had to take insulin every day, which my Aunt Betsy often gave her. She was on a restricted diet because of her diabetic condition, so we kept a lot of grapefruits and oranges in the house. The oranges were in case she went into a diabetic shock. I was instructed to give her a piece of an orange if this happened. I will worry about this constantly, and I will often sneak into her room when she was taking naps and watch her breathe. If I saw her shake, I will wake her up. "Bobby! Bobby!" "What? What? Are you sleeping?" I never knew what to say then. "Yes, I'm sleeping. But I can't talk as I'm asleep." "It is no problem. Let us talk. What's the matter, Rachel?" She was always so kind. Bobby took me on my first trolley ride. The trolley used to run down Bergen Street in Brooklyn in those days. It cost 5 cents, and the seats were wooden. You would hang near the back and get them open air ride. I'll hang my head out on the side to let the wind blow in my face. Whoosh. Anything that moved I liked. Speed, trains, trolleys, skates. Bobby liked to sit on the benches and line Eastern Parkway near her house and crochet quilts and sweaters and covers for clothes bangers and chit-chat with her Jewish buddies. They were old women, immigrants who had come over with their children, and America fascinated them. Bobby often held court talking Yiddish with her pals as people swept past on their way to work. "These young people in America go too fast," she will say. Her needle will go swip, swip while she talked. "My granddaughter, Rachel," and she pointed to me. "She can never sit at home. She wants to ride Dolly all day." And the old ladies will nod and smile and say to me, "Yes, yes, but you should stay home and be a nice girl, Rachel." They were funny old ladies. My Aunt Betsy, the youngest of my mother's sisters, was living with Baba during these early days. She worked as a bookkeeper for a lingering store on the east side in Manhattan. Aunt Bets was beautiful like all of Mama's sisters. She had long dark hair and dark eyes, and she dressed fine and took very good care of herself. She had a lot of friends who would drop by the apartment and talk to me and make me feel grown up. They always talked about shopping at Klein's or 14th Street in Manhattan to pick up dresses at bargain prices. Aunt Bets was young and kind of with it. So when I come up to New York in the summer of the 36, pregnant, she could see something was wrong with me. I wasn't showing, but she knew something was going on because I was so distraught. She kept asking me, "What's the matter, Rachel? What's the matter?" I had to tell someone, so I finally broke down and told her. She didn't ask me anything else. She just went about it in a matter-of-fact way my mother's family did things. She made a few phone calls, found a Jewish doctor in Manhattan, and took me to his office, where I had an abortion. It was a horrible, painful experience, and the doctor had used no anesthesia. Afterwards, I was in so much pain. I couldn't walk. So Aunt Bets and I sat on the stoop of the doctor's office, and I cried. And I even thought my tears I was apologizing to her because I was ashamed. "I'm sorry," I said. I don't want to bother." "It's all right," Aunt Bet says. "Just don't let it happen again." And that was it. I was always grateful to Aunt Bets for that. Even though she slammed the door in my face a few years later, I never felt bitter towards her. She had her own life and her own sets of hurts to deal with. After all, I wasn't her child. Mama's sisters were more about money than anything else. And any hurts that popped us along the way, they just swept them under the rug. They were all trying hard to be American, not knowing what to keep and what to leave behind. But you know what happens when you do that. If you throw water on the floor, it will always find a hole. Just believe me.
For months after my stepfather died, Mommy walked around the house as if she were blind, staggering through the motions of life. She gave away Daddy's clothes, his tools, his hats, gone to Goodwill. She sent us off to school and tried to maintain her crazy house as usual, ranting about this and that, but the fire was gone. In the evening, she often sat at the kitchen table, completely lost in thought. She'd stop in mid-sentence and walk away silently, covering her face. At night, she cried in her room, though she always hid her tears from us. Daddy's gold Pontiac sat in front of the house for months, leaves gathering around the tires, and bird crap gathering on its hood.
"I'm going to learn how to drive it,"
she promised, but instead, she started riding her bike and taking piano lessons, sitting at the piano every evening, staring at the music and slowly, excruciatingly picking out the notes to her favorite gospel hymn.
"What a friend we have in Jesus."
She played each note separately as if they had no connection to each other, and they echoed through the house and landed on the walls like tears. I couldn't stand to hear it. I would cover my ears at night, or better still, I would just go out. There was no one to tell me not to. My grades plummeted almost immediately. I attended Benjamin Cardozo High School in Bayside, Queens, and while I had been a good student in the 9th grade, the following year, I more or less dropped out. I failed everything. I left home in the morning and simply did not go to school, just like Mommy did years before me. I began my own process of running, emotionally disconnecting myself from her, as if by doing so I could keep her suffering from touching me. After years of waiting, I was finally the king in my house, the oldest kid, with the power to boss and torture my younger siblings the way I'd been bossed and tortured. But now that moment had arrived. I spent as much time away from home as possible. I quit church and avoided my deeply religious godparents. I was the first kid on my block to smoke cigarettes and reefer. I joined a soul band, Black Ice, on the other side of town, playing any instrument I could round up. Sax, flute, and bass, all borrowed. We played cool and the gang songs for hours, smoking weed and drinking Old English 800 malt liquor, and rehearsing in the drummer's basement for days at a time, until the guy's mother threw us out, at which we'd find another place to jam. The band attracted legions of followers, girls of whom at 14 I was still deathly afraid, and new friends, cool cats named Beanie, Marvin, Chink, Pig, and Bucky, who smoked cigarettes and reefer, digging the band's sounds.
Oh yeah, you can play, man. You're smoking.
My new friends and I shoplifted. We broke into cars. We snuck onto the nearby Conrail, Long Island Railroad's tracks and broke into freight cars, robbing them of bicycles, television sets, and wine. Once a cop caught us there looking to steal, but we had no goods on us. He lined us up against a freight car and searched us, then smashed one kid in the face with his blackjack. The kid had tried to say he wasn't with the rest of us. He led us around the freight yards at gunpoint for about an hour, waving his gun under our noses, saying,
You nigger scum, I should shoot you right now.
We thought we were going to die, but he let us go. It didn't deter us. At one point, we found a freight car so full of wine, we stole crates and crates of it. Half the teenagers in St. Albans were wandering around drunk for weeks. The cops tried to crack down and one night caught 4 of us dividing up cases of the stolen wine on a dead-end street. They rushed in on us, 2 squad cars with headlights off, and cops in the front and back, engines roaring, tires squealing, while we scattered like flies into the junkyard nearby. I barely got away. I was running behind my big slow friend Marvin and couldn't make it to the fence on the other side of the junkyard where everyone else escaped. I dove under an abandoned dump truck and lay quiet, still clasping a bottle of cheap peppermint-tasting wine in my hand, gritting my teeth and nearly peeing on myself as I watched the cops' shoes and saw the beam of their flashlights zipping around just inches from my feet. The next day I got so drunk in relief I couldn't make it home. My friend Joe carried me to my house, where I fell down, got up, pissed in the street in front of my sisters who were desperately trying to get me into the house without Mommy seeing me, then collapsed. When I woke up hours later, Mommy was sitting at the foot of my bed, whipping belt in hand. She whipped me mercilessly, tears in her eyes. It did not help. My friends became my family and mother just became people I lived with. I was obviously hiding and angry as well, but I would never admit that to myself. The marvelous orchestrated chaos that Mommy had so painstakingly constructed to make her house run smoothly broke down when Daddy died, and Mommy was in no fixing mood. My stepfather's final admonition to me went unheeded as I absolved myself of all responsibility and stayed out of the house as much as possible, thus avoiding the emotional impact of watching Mommy suffer. She, in turn, suffered more, having no one to help her keep the younger ones in line. In addition, she had no money to pay heating bills and light bills and phone bills, sending every dime she had from my stepfather's pension and her small work salary and Social Security to my siblings in college and grad school. Gradually, the house slipped farther and farther into despair. I ignored it. To earn dough, I sold reefer, keeping a stash of it at the railroad tracks. When I ran out, I talked my friend Joe into robbing a dealer who we knew had a big stash. Joe had a .22 caliber pistol, and I carried a straight-edge shaving razor I found among my stepfather's things. We strong-armed the dealer for the weed, and when he protested, I hit him, and he backed off. When we ran out of dough from that, we snatched a purse on Newburgh Street from an old black woman who screamed and hollered while we laughed and ran. We got $1.16, and Joe felt sorry for the woman and refused to do it again. So I did it alone, waiting in the dark doorway of a closed barber shop as the women got off the bus, ripping the purses out of their protesting hands as they cried out in fear and shock. Punk that I was. I did feel sorry for them, their screams echoing in my ears as I ran, my heart beating so hard it felt like a brick pounding against my chest, but not sorry enough. I was numb. I felt I was getting back at the world for injustices I had suffered, but if you sat me down and asked me which injustices I was talking about, I wouldn't have been able to name them if my life depended on it. I snatched old women's purses just as I had seen my own mother's purse snatched when I was 8 years old. But in my mind, the two acts were not related. I had no feelings. I had smothered them. Every time they surged up, I shoved them back down inside me the way you stuff clothing in a drawer and shut it. Reefer and wine helped me forget any pain, and as the pain and guilt increased, my problems with drugs worsened. I took pains to keep my life as a punk a secret from my mother. I stole a bunch of blank report cards from the school library rather than have Ma see my horrible grades, which were basically zero since I never showed up. It was a complicated project requiring real ingenuity and a friend named Vincent who helped, but I made the mistake of asking my sister Kathy to fill out the one I used for myself, because I was afraid Mommy would recognize my handwriting. Instead of putting down my usual grades, I had been an A student, Kathy wrote in C grades. Mommy looked at the grades and said,
James is no C student.
She picked up the phone and called the school and got the shock of her life. She could not punish me. She knew that. I was too old, too strong, and too far gone. She enrolled me in summer school and I got thrown out. My older brothers came home from college and admissioned me, beating me from one end of the house to the other. I still got high and stayed out all hours. Finally, Mommy sent me to stay with my sister Jack, who had moved from Harlem to Louisville, Kentucky with her new husband.
Jack will straighten your butt out.
She sniffed. I told her I doubted it. I loved Jack. She was a small, pretty Christian woman with freckles and brown eyes that missed nothing. She wore elaborate wigs and talked real down home with a heavy, deep accent full of
I ain't.
And
Come on.
she sometimes wrapped her head in scarves and worked as a cook and domestic, usually for white people, but beneath her domestic look was an intelligent, clairvoyant woman who understood more about me as a mixed child than I understood about myself. Jack had lived in Harlem for 10 years before moving to Kentucky. She knew more about the street than I did. Going to stay with Jack for the summer was not punishment for me. It was sweet liberty, and I stayed there 3 straight summers, always managing to get tossed from summer school in New York City just to get sent down there. Jack was too busy to keep a watchful eye on me, or so I thought. She had a young baby, worked full-time as a cook in a cafeteria, and had a husband who was a handful. The first time I came to her house, she told me,
You want to go out? Go out. You'll see. But if you come to my house with a gun, I'll shoot you myself.
and she meant it. She let me run around, albeit reluctantly, with her husband, Big Richard, whom I worshipped. He was a tall, thin, chocolate-skinned man with a mustache who favored shades, short-sleeved shirts, shiny shoes, and sharkskin pants, and always held a lit cigarette between his teeth. Big Richard was a cool customer who ran with some rough characters down in Louisville, but while many of his friends had been cut, stabbed, maimed, and shot, Big Richard always stayed injury-free because his brain worked like a bulge pump, immediately sucking info out of any situation, his mind clicking behind those dark shades at all times. He could walk into a nightclub and sniff danger instantly, backing out right away.
Someone's gonna get shot in there.
He'd say, and sure enough, the next day, you'd hear that someone got tagged. Richard worked at the Brown and Williamson tobacco plant, but all day and night before his shift started, he and I would go out with his boys on the corner at the Vermont liquor store, a couple of miles from Jack's house at 34th and Vermont Avenue on the city's west side. The 3 summers I spent at Vermont Liquors on the corner, which Big Richard pronounced
Corner.
were my true street education. The men on the corner were Southern working men, plumbers, carpenters, painters, drunks, con artists, retired Army lifters from nearby Fort Knox, tobacco workers for Brent and Williamson, and some just plain old hustlers. They were big, muscled men with white teeth and huge arms who wore work clothes and undershirts, painter's pants, and work boots. They smoked filterless Pall Malls and Terratons and drove big cars, Electra 225s, Cadillacs, and long Oldsmobiles. They liked fine women, good whiskey, crap games, and local softball league in which they fielded a team of good-natured alcoholics. They played other teams of good-natured alcoholics, and while fistfights occasionally broke out, rarely was there a gunfight afterwards. The men on the corner were honorable drinking men with their own code of ethics. A man's word is his bond, and you never insulted anyone's woman. You didn't drink from the same bottle as a man who confessed to oral sex with women. You never cuffed the dice during crap games, and if you pulled out a gun, which you shouldn't do, you better use it before it got used on you. They had names like Red, Hot Sausage, One-Armed James, and Chicken Man, an old drunk who was my favorite. Chicken Man was a small man with deep, rich, almost copper-toned skin, a wrinkled face, and laughing eyes. He wore an old fishing hat that seemed to cover his entire face, and plaid pants that left about 2 inches of sock and 4 inches of ankle showing. He smelled of liquor and beer all the time, but he kept a pocket full of candy, which he laid on the various children who came by the liquor store to see him, some his kin and some not. You could see him coming from a distance, appearing out of nowhere like an angel, his silhouette seeming to rise from the ground in the simmering heat, though he actually emerged from one of the ramshackle houses that lined the road a half-mile away. He'd stagger up 34th Street like a wandering bird lost in flight, his hands spread out at his sides like he was flying, waving at cars that honked at him, arriving on the corner at 2 p.m. drunk. He'd set up shop on the corner like it was his office, sitting in front of the liquor store on a wood crate and drinking till he ran out of liquor or money, at which time he'd stagger off blindly drunk, laughing at some silly philosophy he'd just laid down. Chicken Man was a sweet man. He was completely incoherent when he was drunk, but when sober, he was one of the chief philosophers of the corner. He'd sit on his crate like King Tut, his arms folded, his head shaking, and he'd watch traffic pass, commenting on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, money, liquor. Don't mix corn liquor and cheap wine ever. And women. Never pork a woman on her period, her body's giving off filth. Chicken Man laughingly called white folks Mr. Charlie or Chuck.
How Mr. Charlie got his name?
Chicken Man explained one day.
It's from when you're drunk, you call him like this. Charlie!
He fiend throwing up.
But you're real drunk when you call Chuck like this. Chuck!
He fiend severe throwing up.
What about Ralph?
I asked, knowing full well that when a dude threw up, we called it Ralphing. At least in New York we did.
Forget Ralph. You don't count. Mr. Charlie counts. Now buy me a beer.
The men on the corner seemed to pay no attention to Mr. Charlie. The closest they came to him was when the police rode by, sometimes stopping to ask if anyone had seen this or that person. They were met with stony silence, or sometimes even jokes and laughter. The men did not seem to be afraid of the police, nor did they dislike them. Their lives just seemed complete without the white man. I liked that. Their world was insular, away from the real world that I was running from. They called me New York and let me sit out there all day practicing my flute and smoking all the weed I wanted. I turned 15 on the corner, but could act like I was 25, and no one cared. I could hide. No one knew me. No one knew my past, my white mother, my dead father, nothing. It was perfect. My problems seemed far, far away. One of Big Richard's good friends was a guy named Pike who had dark skin, a mustache, and an easygoing manner. I stole a few car batteries with Pike until somebody saw us in their driveway at night, flicked the porch light on, and took a pot shot at us.
You don't need to be doing this. There's no way.
Pike said, panting for breath when we were in the clear. He wouldn't let me run with him anymore after that. Like most dudes on the corner, he looked out for me. When I protested saying I needed money, he said,
Don't worry, I'm gonna get you a job in the turd factory, making all the money you want. What's the turd factory?
I asked.
It's a factory where they make turds.
He explained this to me one afternoon while he, Big Richard, and I were cruising around in his car. Big Richard was riding shotgun, chomping on his cigarette, and staring out the window to keep from laughing.
I want the job.
I said.
What do I do? You sit in the big chair and the turds flow down this long stream of water. You separate the big turds from little turds. How do you do that? They got a tool you use. Or you can use your hand. Whatever, it don't matter. It's good money, man. You want the job or not? I want it, man. I want the job. Take me there.
I finally did get a real job pumping gas at a station about a mile from the corner. The man who ran it was named Herman, a big, burly black man with a wide chest who was mean as the day was long. My first day on the job, the mechanic at the station, a young, light-skinned black guy, told me,
Don't cross Herman. He put 2 men down already.
I didn't ask any questions about those 2 cats, just made sure I wasn't the third, because Herman was a big, mean, irritated, angry, butt-kicking dude. Every night just before closing time, he'd hand me a bucket full of gas and a mop and say,
Mop this goddamn floor and don't smoke while you're doing it neither.
Then he'd stand right outside the door and smoke and watch me mop the entire floor of the auto shop. Nobody ever robbed Herman's station while I was there, nor did any customers ever fool with him. My job was to pump gas, change tires, fix flats, and generally keep out of Herman's way, which I more or less did, but I got into a fistfight with one of his friends, a scar-faced, scratch-a-match in the palm of his hand homosexual who was harassing me. Who knows, maybe it was my girly face and my New York accent, but he got funky with me afternoon, and I punched him in the face. But he got funky with me one afternoon, and I punched him in the face a few times before he went under his car seat for his pistol and chased me around the station. The ruckus caused a big stir, and Herman fired me on the spot. I retreated to the corner, plotting revenge and seeking wisdom from my main man, Chicken Man. A sober Chicken Man had 2 words of advice.
Forget it.
He said.
I can't forget it. I should have gotten the gun and shot him.
I said. Chicken Man chuckled.
You don't know shit from shooting off.
He said.
Is that how you want to end up going to jail for him? Because that's where you'll end up, doing time hanging on this corner. When you get out, is that what you want from yourself? Because if it is, you can have it. Go on. I'm a smart guy.
I said.
I don't have to take that kind of shit. Nobody knows how smart I really am. Chicken Man, but I'm smart. And nobody give a damn neither.
Chicken Man snapped.
Everybody on this corner is smart. You ain't no smarter than anybody here. If you so smart, why you gotta come to this corner every summer? Because you flunked in school. You think if you drop out of school, somebody beg you to get back? Hell no. They won't beg your black ass to go back. What makes you so special is they'll beg you. Who are you? You ain't nobody. If you drop out of school and shoot people and hang on this corner all your life, go ahead. It's your life.
I had never heard Chicken Man talk so severely, and what he said didn't really hit me, not right away. I said to myself,
He's just a drunk.
And continued my adventures. Not long after, however, a guy named Mike, an easygoing, humorous 6'8" guy who had always encouraged me to get off the street, had an argument on the corner with his girlfriend Mustang, a fine, lithe black woman with a large black ass and a foxy wiggle. As the argument progressed, Mike began slapping Mustang around so hard I wanted to jump in, but Chicken Man stopped me.
Leave that alone, New York.
He hissed.
That's between him and his woman. Don't ever get between a man and his woman.
Mustang left the corner in her car, burning rubber, promising to bring her new boyfriend back to kill Mike. The corner quickly emptied. There was nothing like the threat of a gunfight to make everyone go home. The next day, Big Richard gave me explicit instructions to
stay off the corner.
But I snuck over there anyway and watched as Mike came by that afternoon, rumbling up in his big Buick, playing Marvin Gaye on his 8-track player. He cut the engine and got out whistling, totally cooled out, like it was another day at the office. He walked to the back of his car, opened the trunk, and calmly pulled out a lawn chair, a towel, and a sawed-off double-barreled shotgun with both barrels taped together. He set the lawn chair in front of the store and sat down on it. He put a bottle of J&B Scotch on the ground on one side of him, a bottle of Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine on the other side, placed the shotgun on his lap, and put the towel over it.
I'm gonna sit here and drink and rock and I'll wait for him,
he said coolly. He sat there for 2 days, rocking, drinking, while the men tiptoed around him, keeping one eye on the road and one eye on Mike. Mustang's new boyfriend never showed. The next week, Mike and Mustang showed up on the corner, arm in arm, kissing and hugging.
That's why I don't have no arguments with no woman.
Chicken Man said.
It don't do nothing but fool you around.
But not long after, he did get into an argument with a woman. They argued in the morning, and he went off and forgot about it. And later that day, she came into the liquor store and stabbed him as he was waiting in line to buy a beer. He coughed a few times, then lied down on the floor and died.
After my abortion, I wrote to Tabitha and said I didn't want to come back to Suffolk. I enrolled in Girls Commercial High School on Bergen Street in 1936. It was just down the street from Bourbon. But the schoolwork was hard and I struggled my entire junior year, sleeping on Bourbon's couch and wrestling with algebra every night. Girls High School was ahead of Suffolk High and I never would have graduated on time. So after the school year ended, I returned to Virginia to finish high school. When I came back to Suffolk, the first thing I said to Peter was, "We can't see each other anymore. Don't come by." He said, "I've been waiting for you. I still love you." And I swayed because I still felt a deep love for him. Not long after that, I was in the store behind the counter and 2 young black women came in. I overheard them talking about Peter, and one of them says, "Oh yeah, he's getting married soon." I almost fell over. Tubbo was standing right next to me, so I grabbed a rag and started wiping the counter, edging closer to them, eavesdropping. I was practically falling over the counter trying to hear them. "Oh yeah," says the other, "he's got such and such pregnant." She named a black girl who lived behind us in the neighborhood. I went right out and found him. The heck with who knew about us. I was so mad, I marched right down the road to his house in daylight and got him out. "Tell me the truth," I said. He confessed it. "They're making me marry her," he said. "My folks are making me." "Did you get her pregnant?" "Yeah." "Oh, that messed me up," I told him. I didn't want to see him anymore and walked back through the black neighborhood into the store. I went upstairs and cried my heart out because I still loved him. I went through the entire ordeal, and here he was getting busy with somebody else. The fact that he was a black girl and he was marrying was black. I made up my mind then, and I was going to leave Suffolk for good. I was 17 in my last year of high school, and for the first time in my life, I was starting to have opinions of my own. There was no life for me here. I was planning to leave for New York, but see, I had Mama. I was her eyes and ears in America. She couldn't speak English, and I translated for her and looked out for her, because Tabab didn't care for her at all. Her stomach was starting to bother her, and she was starting to have these fainting spells, you know? She'd just black out in the middle of the day. Tabab couldn't have cared less. He hired a black woman to look after Mabeb, and the woman cared for Mabeb more than he did. She stayed late and looked after Mabeb even if he didn't pay her, and he paid her with so little as it was. He thought money he spent to take care of his wife would do it, you know, substitute for the fact that he didn't love her. But a wife wants love. She was a good Jewish wife for him, but their marriage was starting to crumble because he didn't care about her. That's why I knew I was leaving home. I wasn't going to have an arranged marriage like my parents did. I'd rather die first, which I did do in a way because I lost my mother and sister when I left home. While the kids in my high school were excited and giggly about the prom and graduation and making plans, but I've been in New York and see the big time and didn't plan on going to either. No one asked me to go to prom anyway, but Francis kept saying. Suffolk High had this graduation ceremony where the seniors lined up in their caps and gowns outside the high school and marched onto Main Street, double file, to the Protestant church for a ceremony. They called it a pre-graduation ceremony or a bachelorette or some such thing. I had to ask Tabet for money for the cap and gown, and the minute he heard about me marching into a Protestant church, he said, "No, forget it. You're not marching into any gentle church." He was dead set against it. You know, my parents were so old-fashioned, European in their ways, it wasn't funny. Like if you told a social worker into my house and he walked to my parents, it would be like talking to that wall over there. They were stuck in their ways. There was no way that they could change. He was still my father and I was still a teenager living in his house, and he could still pull off his belt and beat the mess out of me when he wanted. So what could I do? He wasn't worried about my graduation. What bothered him more was that I had no marriage prospects, and he began to take me on his business jaunts to Portsmouth and Norfolk, round to the stores and wholesale supply houses, and he'd introduce me to the merchants and their sons if they had any. It was like he was saying, "Here's my daughter on display, what do you think?" Sometimes he'd send me on jaunts by myself, driving the car and pulling the trailer, me and Dee Dee. We'd load up the trailer full of goods from the warehouse and drive to the dismal swamp around Portsmouth and Norfolk. Folks would tell us, "Watch out for the red lights district in Norfolk," and we'd go around Norfolk avoiding red traffic lights. Well, I was upset with Tabib about graduation, and we were speaking for a while, but he reached a point where he really needed me to help him run the store, because Sam was gone and Mama wasn't feeling well. Her stomach was starting to really bother her to the point where she was doubled over in pain. We'd take her to the town doctor and he'd say this or that. He mentioned an operation of some sort, but he didn't know. He was a nasty old man. I went to him once and he was as fresh as he could be, touching me in places that were not necessary and saying absent things, so I never went back to him. Of course I couldn't tell anybody about it, but he looked at Mabib and said he didn't know what was wrong with her. When Tabib and I argued with the cap and gown for a long time, and at one point I got so mad I revealed my plans to go to New York after graduation. "I'm going back to New York," I told him. "I'm leaving." He stalked out of the room, cursing and swearing. A few minutes later, Mama followed him out and spoke to him. They were rarely speaking by then. The next day he came over and gave me the money for my cap and gown. "You can participate in the march," he said, "but do not go into that church. It's forbidden." "I'm going to the ceremony," I said. "Respect your mother and me," he said. "Don't break the law of the Bible. Don't go into that gentle church," he said. Well, my mind was made up. On graduation day, Dee Dee and I opened up the store and set out the meats, stacked the fresh vegetables, and I worked behind the counter until it was time to go. Of course, my parents wouldn't go to that gentle graduation, so I put on my cap and gown and walked the 6 blocks to Suffolk High School and waited for Francis in the parking lot. Francis was late getting there, which gave the other students and their parents something to stare at, to watch me standing there by myself. I was ready to turn around and run home. By the time she showed up, I told her, "Francis, I'm not sure I can go into that church," she said. "I understand, Ruth. I'll graduate by myself then, because I don't want to graduate next to anyone but you." Well, I felt like I couldn't let that happen, so I said, "I can do it. Let's go." We took a picture in our caps and gowns and got in line, double file, and marched together. The line marched out of Suffolk High School's yard and onto Main Street and slowed as it bottled up at the church doorway. As we approached the church, I started to shake and sweat, and just before we reached the church doorway, I stepped out of the line. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't go inside that church. In my heart, I was still a Jew. I had done some wrong things in my life, but I was still my parents' child. I turned away, but not before Frances saw my tears. She just got out of line herself, but I waved her away. "Frances, you go on in," I said. "Don't miss the ceremony because of me." She went in. She had to wipe the tears from her own face, but she got back in line and marched through the ceremony alone. and she sat through the graduation ceremony next to my empty seat. I walked home sobbing in my cap and gown and caught a Greyhound bus for New York the very next day.
Discussion questions. Question number 1. If you were in Ruth's situation, would you get an abortion, yes or no?
In her situation, well, how old was she? She was like,
She was a white Jewish woman who was pregnant with a black baby
yeah, at that time,
guy.
maybe I think I would, even though now, like, I'm totally, like, against the situation in that time. Like, she could have been killed, Peter could have been killed, and yeah, I think that would have been, like, they should have never just did anything anyway, but yeah. So, yeah.
The way I feel about it, personally, I wouldn't have got the abortion. I mean, I'm not a female, so I can't really say about the situation.
Let's
but the
say
reason
from Peter's perception, what would you have done? Would you have let her?
Well, I'm not saying it from Peter's perception. I'm saying it from my own perception because my mom had perspective. My bad. I'm saying it from my own perspective because my mom had me when she was 16. So if she would have kind of got an abortion, I would kind of, cease to exist.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's
But
why I
also, at the time, like you're saying, your dad would have been dead and your mom would have been dead. So,
I mean, also at the same time, I don't have a dad. I don't know my actual dad. I don't know anything about my father.
okay, yes.
Question number 2. If you were in Ruth's situation, will you go to New York every summer if you could?
To be away, yeah, I would. It's a distraction. Like a getaway, I guess, yeah.
Like, despite being poor, like being in her actual situation that she had to go to New York and work for her aunts and like look at her cousins get everything and you don't get anything.
Well, I definitely wouldn't want to go through that, but because she was getting away from her father, who was obviously very racist and
Abusive.
wasn't treating her mom right, and I mean, she had to deal with racism at school. The fact that her boyfriend was black and she couldn't really be with him in the open. So I don't know. I don't think there really is a difference between being where she was and in New York, because in New York she was working, but she wasn't treated how she wanted to be treated, I guess, having to watch her cousins, like you said, get things that she didn't get. So yeah, that's a kind of a hard decision because it was both kind of bad.
Well, in her situation with her parents and her father being a very cruel man, going away from that kind of situation just in general is beneficial, I would say.
How come you think it's beneficial?
Because sometimes you can only stay in your family for so long. Like, yes, they are your family, but sometimes your family can get very annoying, very on your nerves. Like, for say, I don't have a cruel, mom or a stepdad or anything, but, there are times where I want to get away from my family, and I'll go out with my friends just to get out the house because I don't want to be at the house. So in her situation, I can definitely see why she does that.
Okay.
Question number 3.
What's that?
If you were in if you're in James's situation, would you have coped with it the same way that James did?
Elaborate, because they're not gonna understand.
In the way how he kind of turned to drugs and turned to violence and skipped out on school just to do whatever he wanted to do and whatever made him feel comfortable.
Yeah. Shoot, due to circumstances now. I don't know. I probably would, because back then that was their way of Like, it was kind of like a distraction, basically. It was your outlet, I guess you could say. So, I mean, going there every summer, he didn't have to deal with really following any rules. The people he was around on the corner, you know, they treated him like he was an adult, and he was only, 15? He was only 15.
15.
So, I mean,
he
if
felt like
you,
he was 25.
yeah, and if you could be somewhere and be treated like an adult and not have to do what kids do, like go to school and all that stuff, like, I'm pretty sure, you know, an immature child that doesn't really know life like that would obviously take that over, you know, going to school or anything like that.
So would you consider yourself an immature child?
I mean, we're all immature in a
But you. Talking about you.
No, not with my knowledge now. No, I wouldn't. I would stay in school. I wouldn't want to, you know, sacrifice, especially being a woman. I wouldn't want to sacrifice not having education, you know, to just mess around and, you know, being on the corner like that.
So
I wouldn't
you
do that
wouldn't
personally.
cope with James' situation the same way
No,
James did?
I wouldn't. No.
What about you, Sam?
I don't think that I would, like, I wouldn't do, like, all the, like, in his situation, I understand why he did it, but if it was me, I wouldn't have, like, gone to drugs and alcohol and all that, because there's still so much life ahead of him that he had, and he just kind of ruined it with the drugs and the alcohol and running away and all that.
I think I would have done the same thing because, I mean, he still wrote a book and he still had a great outcome. Quotes, like, despite all the things he went through, he still had fun in high school without even caring about his grades. Doesn't mean I don't care about my grades. Kind of do, kind of don't, but still. I don't feel like kids need to go to school every single day. They need to learn the material, but I don't feel like they need to go to school all the days of the week to learn that material. I think it needs to be shorter and more summertime.
And two, he was actually learning. I mean, but he just wasn't learning, like, you know, school stuff. He was learning the street life. He wasn't learning, you know, like, he wasn't book smart. He was street smart. So, I mean, he was still learning, but it just wasn't education-wise. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean...
He was book smart at first until he ran away.
Yeah.
And then he became street smart, but still was book smart, just not using those capabilities.
Exactly.
Going on question number 4.
Oh, if you were in Ruth's situation, would you go to the graduation?
I would, because I'm a rebel like that. Just kidding.
I would too. I wouldn't let somebody else, even if it's my parents, I wouldn't let them interfere with something that I know is beneficial for me. I mean, but at the same time, like, her religion was what was stopping her from, you know, graduating. And for me, religion, my religion wouldn't, you know, stop me from graduating. But if I was Jewish, I don't know. That's a really hard decision to kind of just make at the moment.
But even so, she still kind of broke her family's, like, word by running off with a black man.
Yeah.
And she was disowned and seen as dead to her family.
But that wasn't part of Jewish law. The father was just racist. To not be with a black person, someone not of your race.
Also, it was I'd say it was a little bit of both because she was supposed to have an arranged marriage, was she not?
She was. Yes, she was.
So that's also kind of breaking Jewish code, but, like, at the same time, it is also going against your family's word and your father's word, even though he was, like, a really bad person.
Religion, it should be a source of happiness to a person's spirit in some type of way. And maybe if she wasn't happy following the Jewish rules and everything her parents told her, I feel like I would have gone no matter what, because if if that religion is not bringing happiness to me, then it's not the religion that's right for me. Just
Right.
because I was born in it doesn't mean that I have to be in it.
I would have gone to the graduation because after everything that her family went through, like, yes, they are like her blood, but they're not really like family. She doesn't really like consider them family anymore because they put her through so much like trauma and stuff. So the only family she really had was her best friend, and she was just trying to go to the graduation to support her, even if in her heart she knew that it wasn't right because she was a Jew.
All right, so that's all we have for this discussion question.
Thanks for listening to this podcast.
Every Saturday on 3 p.m.